I got this neat 330 America at my shop. She's a sister to my car. My car is also a 330 America. So what's neat about these cars is there's only 50 of them that were built. And so chances are this one probably was at the factory at the same time mine was, because they built them in obviously batches of 50. So there weren't that many at the factory at the same time. And if it was only 50 ever made, a very good chance that 60 years ago they shared the factory floor. But anyway, this car was a car that I found for the customer 20 years ago, and he purchases and been enjoying it. And I've been maintaining it for the last several years and just taking care of it and fixing whatever needs to get done on it. It's an original paint car, which is kind of neat. Obviously been well taken care of through the years. Shows its patina, but at the same time, how often do you see an original paint car? Largely unrestored. I mean, mechanically repaired. Francois and I redid the engine, but other than that, mechanically, it hasn't needed much. Just usual maintenance, and anything that's worn we replace. But I was having a conversation with the owner on this round of things. We were changing the ride height. We're trying to fix that a little bit. So we got that fixed. But one of the things that I've been doing on these cars is adding an extra fuel pump. The original electric fuel pump on these cars is a weak link, and with modern fuels, what we're seeing is a lot of these carbureted cars are seeing vapor lock issues, and so the fuel pump kind of has to run a lot all the time, perhaps in the summertime when the ambient temperature gets high, and the modern fuels tend to have a lower boiling point, so they tend to vapor lock in the fuel lines. There's a bunch of factors that happen. These cars, when they were new, you just didn't see that much traffic in 1964, 65. In those days, most of these cars, they didn't see where you would sit in traffic for 15, 20 minutes at a time, where you could just end up driving along and all of a sudden get stuck on some traffic light that just takes forever, and you just sit and idle, or you could just get stuck on a highway, and all of a sudden traffic just slows to a stop. And what happens is the heat builds up and everything gets warm, and including the fuel lines. And what happens is the fuel inside the fuel lines start to evaporate and has nowhere to go. So it just vapor, it turns into vapor in the line. Well, fuel pumps can't pump vapor. They can only pump fuel when it's in a liquid form. So that's what they call vapor lock, is that there's a bubble of vaporized fuel where the fuel pump is, and it can't push the fuel. And once that happens, it's very difficult to get fuel to the carburetors, and then the fuel in the carburetors need to be kind of cooler, because when they're hot, it boils up in the carburetors too. So it could be several things. It could be the fuel pump delivering barely enough fuel to the carburetors. The carburetors are warm, and then the fuel boils in the carburetors. What's changed in modern fuels today? Well, first off, in the United States, we run anywhere from 10% alcohol to 15% alcohol in the fuels, and alcohol, I believe, boils at a lower temperature than regular fuel. So on top of all that, all this fuel will, with the alcohol and the different formulations and volatility of the fuel, it has a different boiling temperature, and it changes from each tank of gas depending on the formulation from the manufacturers. So you just never know what kind of fuel you have to put in your car to run. It might have enough octane, but if it has a different boiling point, it'll change the way the car runs. Especially with carburetors, that carburetors are designed to run depending on ambient pressure. So it changes the way it runs, and so definitely, at the very least, the fuel system kind of has to be addressed, or the fuel delivery system has to be addressed. Add that to a 60-year-old fuel pump that has been rebuilt several times, not very efficient in the very beginning, and then running for 50, 60 years, and then using 60-year-old technology to push this fuel all the time, which the pump wasn't really designed to run 24/7, or at least all the time when the car is on. So you tax that fuel pump, and ironically, fuel pumps, these original fuel pumps fail when they have to run at the hardest time, which is when you need it the most. So what I've been doing is I've actually been installing a auxiliary fuel pump, modern fuel pump, solid state, doesn't have points switching that opens and closes and arcs and the original design, and runs more efficiently with less draw and pushes fuel all the time. That circulation of fuel is what allows cooler fuel to constantly circulate through the fuel system, whether you're using it or not. So you always feel like you have a fresh delivery of fuel. But what that requires on these older cars is a little bit of modification. Let me put this car up in the air and I'll show you what we're up against. The fuel pump sits on the driver's side up in this little pocket up inside the frame rail, but it's above the muffler. And a couple things. One is not a great place to put a fuel pump. I mean, you can imagine that as the exhaust gets hotter and hotter, the heat just kind of radiates up inside this area and only adds more heat to the fuel line. And then what happens is the fuel lines that run up over also get hot. So you can see this is just kind of exposed steel fuel line. So what happens there is it just kind of continues to just get hotter and hotter. So what I have is, you can see that the connections to the fuel system that comes down from the fuel filter and goes to the fuel pump, and then also goes to the in and out of the fuel pump, are banjo fittings. And what I created was a fitting that can modify all this without cutting anything off. What a lot of people do is when they put an electric pump in here, they have to use these banjo fittings. The electric pumps, the modern electric pumps, don't have banjo fittings. So easy way to do it is they just cut these steel lines and then put a rubber hose on them. Well, the problem with that is that you're modifying the original, and it'll never be able to go back to the original pump. Let me show you what I've done. So this is the usual banjo bolt that goes on the fuel pump, the electric fuel pump. It's a fine pitch thread with a regular bolt. So what I thought about doing, or what I designed, was this. This is basically the same thing, but it has a through bolt, or it goes through. So what that does is it allows you to put this on the original fuel pump fitting, and then the banjo goes on one side, and then this side you could just put a hose on there, and the hose will then just go to this pump. So it runs parallel. So in other words, let's say this one's the in, and this one is the out. So what'll happen is you just basically run a parallel. This one goes in, so on the inside of the original pump, this goes to the in on the new pump, and then out here goes to the out of the electric pump, or the old pump, and then this one also. So they basically can run parallel. So if for some reason, and there's two choices you can run. You can either run both of them off the same circuit. So I wire this wire off of the new pump, and I run this on top of the other pump. So when you turn on the electric pump switch, both of them will run. So this one's pretty quiet, and then you hear the other one click and click, click away. And that noise is what people will think that is the correct sound, and then you got the original fuel pump. But what they don't know is this one's running underneath it. So I could either wire it so I have one switch and it runs both of them. That way, if the original pump fails, this one is still running in parallel to it. So this one will always deliver fuel, whether the other one, so they kind of work together. The other way you could do is just disconnect it. You could still keep the electric pump, the original pump, in place, since we're just running parallel to all of it. If the electric pump, you can disconnect it and just run this one, and wrap the wire away from the other pump, and then just run this guy, and just run it like a regular, modern Ferrari. Because like Daytonas, GTCs, all that other stuff, they went to this type of pump, and because they were designed to run all the time, and they got rid of the mechanical pump and the whole setup. So that's how the cars of the late 60s and 70s ran, and that's what I'm doing, is basically running it like that. So that's the modification. The difference is I'm going to make a couple little things going on the 330 America, which is basically the same setup as any 250 and 330 engine, and I'll show you what I'm going to do. The original fuel pump sits on this little stand, and what I do to add it, I could put, there's plenty of room here to add a fuel pump in here. So what I do is I put a little plate. It slides in between the fuel pump and the bracket that lines up with those two mounting holes, and that allows me to add a bracket to put a second fuel pump in there. It's right next to the original fuel pump. It plumbs right in with the other fuel lines, because they're just right there where the banjo fittings are, and wiring. So I could just slide it right in there, and it's all reversible. I mean, if somebody one day in the future wants to just run the regular fuel pump and wants it to look original, all you gotta do is unbolt everything, and you're back to original. So I took some 16 gauge steel and fabbed up a couple brackets. You can see the holes that I drilled are gonna line up with the bottom of the plate, and I just welded up. I just made a little gusset to hold the, just to keep the thing from flexing, because what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drill holes up here. It's going to mount this. I'm going to mount the fuel pump that way, and then make a little detachable shield to just give it a little bit of a heat shield against that muffler. But I want to get it so that it's detachable. So I'm going to weld nuts to here, and then use that to mount it. So that's next. This is what I have going on. I made the bracket, welded on 2 studs, and did that to both of them. And then what I did was I made another piece that bolted to the studs, and it's just an aluminum shield. So this piece will slide into that bracket that we saw where the fuel pump sits, and then this bolts on. So I have a fuel pump over here just to show you how it does, how it fits together. The 2 bolts will line up here, so this piece will slide underneath the will slide between the fuel pump bracket and the and the fuel pump, and that'll sandwich in there. So even if the bolts come out or anything, it's not going to fall off. And then studs then have this mounted, and then this plate is just another plate that goes underneath and shields the fuel pump and these fuel lines, because these fittings will then just wrap around. This is the outlet, this is the inlet. So I'm just going to run soft hoses out to there and here. So we'll basically have 2 fuel pumps. This wire then goes up inside here, connects to this, and you'll have the other stud which runs the fuel pump. So that one circuit will run both of these fuel pumps at the same time. We'll dress this around, and get it out of the way. And then because this is bolted to the chassis, you have chassis on the ground, and everything goes from there. So that's basically the setup. The fuel lines that go into here, and these will just screw right into the fitting here, capturing the banjo nut or the banjo bolt. This one will go in here as well. So then once we screw these in, they will just plumb into the can't do this with one hand, but anyway, they'll plumb into here and then capture the banjo bolt or the banjo fitting, and then also have fuel coming out of there. And that's basically how it's going to be set up. I'm going to take this all apart now, paint some of these pieces, and we'll go from there. But so far, that's the hardware part of it. it's basically plumbed, and I'm about to mount the fuel pump in its position. You can still access the bottom where the filter is, but what happens is I'm about to put the shield in, and basically that kind of shields the whole bottom of this. You know, it's like a heat shield I made that's gonna bolt onto the bottom on those studs that I welded on that bracket. And I ended up making a bigger shield because I wanted just a little bit more protection to these fuel lines. So once I put that in place, you're really not gonna be able to see any of this stuff. All right, there you have it. The shield's in place, so like I said, you really can't see much once the shield's in, but what it does is it just shields all the hoses and all the lines with a piece of aluminum that just from the muffler, it just kind of keeps everything a little bit cooler. In case, you know, even with all the modern fuel pump and everything, you're giving it a better shot at you know, keeping it away from the muffler and protecting the hoses and all of this stuff. Okay, I got the fuel pump all installed, and I'm gonna start it up. So usually, you know, most vintage Ferraris start in the same way. So what you do is you turn the key on, and you can hear the A pump, but that's the switch that turns on. They're labeled A for auto flux, but it primes the pump. So if you hear it, you can hear the clicking, but also underneath you're gonna hear a very subtle swishing noise. And that's the other pump that I added. And you hear it slowing down, but underneath it's running. The old pump is never going to stop because the way I have it set up to with the other pump, it's always not going to pressurize completely because it's kind of circulating a little bit at this point, which is actually good for fresh fuel and vapor lock. So here we go. We're going to pump the gas, and we're gonna start the car. On this Ferrari, it's push to start. So you push the ignition switch in. See that? So oh, look at that. For some reason, that was weird. The rev counter was stalling a little bit. But we can see we have oil pressure. And that's it starting. So let's take this car out for a quick drive. All right. So new fuel pump is in, and this car should be a little bit more reliable. Looking forward to sending it home. This car has an interesting color. It's, you know, I should find out the name of this color. If you guys know, tell me in the comments below, but it's like a dark brown. It's like a dark chocolate. So what's neat, even though it's a little dusty, in different light, it changes color because it's so dark. I mean, there are times that it looks like, it looks black. Sometimes it looks like a purplish color. I mean, it just has this tendency to reflect a lot of the light of the day. So it certainly is kind of a neat color. I mean, if you told somebody I have a brown car, a lot of people are not a fan of brown, but it's a pretty neat brown color. So, and like I said, it changes color. Take this little side road again. Take the same roads as the one that I took in my 330 America last week, so it's kind of fitting that we're taking the 330 Americas on the same route. Hopefully those people are not around this bend again. So neat about driving this car and my car is they're similar, but yet, you know, these old cars, they all have their own personality. So like, even though it's another 330 American, there's only 50 of them made. They were built about the same time. They just both have their own little characters. I mean, generally similar in driving experience, but just find it neat how they just feel different. Each car feels a little bit different. All right, so this car is heading out. We'll send her home. Thanks for watching.